Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. The text landed between innings of my own life. I was alone in the locker room after practice when my phone buzzed. You know this is just a phase for me, right? I'll outgrow it. I stared at those words like they belonged to someone else's marriage. I'm Daniel Brooks, 39, a high school history teacher and assistant baseball coach in Raleigh, North Carolina. The fluorescent lights hummed. My junior's midterms sat stacked beside a cracked batting helmet. I finished entering the last grade before I answered anything. That felt important. Finish the work. She'd been jabbing at my job for weeks. Cute that you still care about teenagers and batting cages, she'd say, smiling the way people smile at kids playing dress-up. On a Tuesday, she asked if I ever planned to get a real title. On a Thursday, she joked to her friends that I clock out at 3 p.m. like it's 1998, and they laughed, not unkindly, but long enough for me to know I was the punchline. Her phone lived face down on the counter now, covered by a new case and a new passcode. Strategy sessions ran late. Weekends drifted to the girls. I kept telling myself every marriage has seasons. Then she named mine a phase, something temporary by definition, and that season snapped into a forecast. I drove home with the radio off. The neighborhood looked the same. Small porches, dog walkers, the lamplight hitting the pecan trees just right. Inside, the house felt slightly rearranged, though nothing had moved. When she came in, she floated around me like a person measuring rooms for furniture she hadn't bought yet. I poured water, took a breath, and asked evenly, "Is there someone else?" No anger in it, just the question. She blinked and said no, then threw in a shrug for emphasis. "Do you want a separation?" Another blink. "I just want to grow," she said, as if growth required erasing the pot it sprouted in. I nodded. Nothing to argue with in a sentence that vague. Belittling doesn't always arrive as an insult. Sometimes it's a tone, the way a sentence curls at the end. She developed a new vocabulary for my life. Stable became safe, which became stagnant. The boys I coach became your little team. My classroom became that room. When I mentioned we'd gotten 2 kids through a rough week without suspensions, she said, "High stakes," with a tiny smile that wasn't about pride. I don't teach for applause, but I do understand when someone tries to shrink the ground you stand on. That's a tactic, not a personality trait. At school the next day, Mr. Patel in math asked how the lineup was shaping up for our Saturday scrimmage. I told him the truth, better than our budget. He laughed, handed me a coupon for a local sporting goods shop, and said, "You're the only guy I know who can make $300 feed a whole roster." On the walk back, I felt the small, honest weight of being useful. In the afternoon, one of my seniors lingered after the bell and said the essay on Reconstruction finally clicked. Moments like that are the currency of my work. They don't buy cars. They buy sleep. That night she dressed for a dinner I wasn't invited to. "Work friends," she said. It became a phrase that meant people I didn't know who suddenly knew everything wrong with me. When she came home, her eyes were bright with the adrenaline of other rooms. "We were talking about how some men lack ambition," she said, leaning against the fridge. "Not about you," she added quickly, in the way people add it when it is. I rinsed my plate, set it in the rack, and said nothing. You don't win by pleading prosecution for context. The weekend brought a small gathering at our neighbors. On the patio, conversation turned to careers. I kept it simple. I teach history. I coach baseball. The new guy across the yard said, "Respect. That's important work." She laughed lightly and said, "He makes it sound heroic. It's mostly summer vacations and pep talks." A few people smiled, and I felt the familiar chill of being reduced to a caricature in my own life. I set down my cup. Later, back home, she tugged at the thread of our future like it was a sweater she could unravel if she pulled long enough. "Sometimes I think I got married before I knew what I wanted," she said, eyes on her phone. "What do you want now?" I asked. She shrugged again. "To feel bigger." You can't pin a plan to the word bigger. I started changing small things without making announcements. I scanned our important documents to a drive with my name on it. I moved my wedding ring from my hand to the nightstand drawer and closed it gently, because I didn't want to turn a decision I hadn't made into a scene. I stopped texting first. The silence that followed didn't hurt like I expected. On Monday, a kid on the team whose dad never shows up asked if I could look at his swing after practice. We stayed under the fading light until the custodian came to lock the gate. He lined a ball into the gap on the last pitch and smiled at me like he was surprised his body could do that. Driving home, I realized how often I'd borrowed meaning from someone else's recognition when the work itself had always been enough. The house was dark when I pulled in. I ate, graded, put the plate in the rack. At 11, a text. I need you to be okay with my growth. I wrote back, I'm okay with honesty. You're passive, she said over coffee, which meant I wasn't playing the game she'd rehearsed. You're comfortable, she added. When I told her I'd submitted a grant proposal for field lights we couldn't afford, she said, so cute. I almost laughed. Cute is the word people use when they can't stand the dignity of someone doing something that matters to them. I wasn't offended. I was done qualifying my life. I asked her one more time, in the calm voice I reserve for kids about to make permanent mistakes. Do you want out? She traced a circle on the table with her finger, like she was drawing an exit, and said, I want to see what else is out there. I nodded. She called me a phase she'd outgrow. Phases end by themselves. Purpose tends to run the full season. I didn't argue the definition with her. I let the calendar do it for me. Pressure doesn't announce itself. It accumulates in corners. After the phase text, her tone didn't soften. It professionalized. The little jabs about my job turned into talking points, and she delivered them with the certainty of someone who'd been rehearsing in front of a mirror. Friday became girls' night, then Saturday too. Sunday mornings used to be pancakes and the game on low. Now it was sunglasses, a headache, and a commentary about how routine kills passion. I listened. I also started counting, not to throw numbers later, but to keep my mind from arguing with itself. 3 weekends in a row out late. 5 dinners eaten separately in 1 week. A dozen times she described what I do as safe. That's not evidence for a courtroom. It's a barometer. I said little and watched more. The phone placed screen down moved from habit to policy. Passwords changed, then changed again. She learned the posture of someone too busy to be questioned. The busier she looked, the less anyone would dare ask why. The few times I did check our budget, it told the same story the calendar told. Money and time flowing in new directions. Not a crime, just a pattern. I recorded dates, line items, and nothing else. I'm a teacher. I know how easy it is to grade on emotion when you don't anchor to a rubric. At school, structure kept me straight. Second period argued reconstruction like it had happened yesterday. Fourth period finally connected supply lines to strategy in the Civil War unit. After the final bell, I ran infield drills until the sun dipped behind the right field fence and the boys complained about homework. One of my sophomores, the quiet kid, lingered and asked if I thought he could make varsity next year. I told him yes if his grades made varsity, too. The story she told other people about me started finding its way back to me through soft channels. A neighbor repeated something about how I clock out at 3. A coworker of hers shook my hand at the grocery store and said, with the awful warmth people reserve for widowers and public servants, that teaching was noble. I nodded, grabbed milk, and left before my face said what my words wouldn't. Belittling has a way of recruiting a choir. Soon the song sounds like truth because it's catchy. I kept the house in order because a clean space is an armor. Laundry folded, counters wiped, mail sorted, bills paid on time. I wasn't performing for her. I was keeping my own mind from slipping into the swamp where resentment breeds. Each evening, I wrote down 3 facts of the day that went right. 1 from the classroom, 1 from the field, 1 from my own discipline. That practice had nothing to do with optimism. It was a record I could trust more than mood. She began to test the edges for a blow-up and found none. That irritated her more than any argument could have. She'd drop a line like, real ambition would move us out of this neighborhood. Then watch my face for a flinch. I'd ask what zip code she had in mind. No fight appeared. She'd say, I'm not sure I want to be a coach's wife forever, like the phrase itself was a diagnosis. I'd answer, gently, that I've never asked her to be anyone's anything except honest. The angrier script has no scene partner when the other actor refuses to shout. A week later, she switched tactics and introduced theory. We were, according to a podcast she'd discovered, in danger of becoming transactional roommates. She said it like she was reading the diagnosis from a laminated card. I asked, calm, what remedy she proposed. Space, she said. I'd already asked the two questions that matter. Is there someone else? Do you want out? She dodged one and shrugged at the other. This time I asked a third. What does space mean to you? She said she wanted to feel bigger. I'd heard that line before, from people who believe expansion requires demolition. The boys lost a scrimmage that Saturday. We booted 3 grounders and stared at our shoes. After the game, I gathered them by the dugout. You don't control bounces, I told them. You control footwork before the bounce. We'd spend Monday on footwork. On the drive home, I realized I'd just given myself the same talk. I couldn't shape her bounces. I could shape my preparation. The next escalation wasn't spectacular. She announced a last-minute work dinner the same hour our mortgage automatically drafted from the account. I cooked anyway, ate at the counter, stored a plate with foil like muscle memory. At 10:40, she came in with the cologne of a restaurant I could name from the hall. She walked straight to the mirror, took off her earrings, and told me someone at dinner said I reminded them of their favorite teacher from 10th grade. I said that sounded like a compliment. She waited for my defense against faint praise. None arrived. The argument she wanted required my consent. I withheld it. I kept my phone on, do not disturb, after 10 and read. Field lighting grants, mentorship program templates, a chapter on school leadership that argued for boring disciplines, calendars, agendas, clear norms. I made a draft list for a volunteer mentorship program and jotted names of 2 dads who'd hinted they could help. When I did bring up the topic of space again, it wasn't to debate. I said, in the same voice I use with students before an exam, that if she wanted space, I'd respect it, but space comes with terms. Clear timelines. Clear boundaries. No double accounting of intimacy and independence. She rolled her eyes at the word terms like it was bureaucratic. I make schedules for a living. I believe in written expectations. She said I was overcomplicating feelings. I told her feelings grow best inside structures that protect them from weather. That week, she stayed out both weekend nights. I set coffee for one and took a dawn run past the school, where our outfield still sat in shadow. The early air in Raleigh has a slice to it when the season turns. It reminds you you're made of lungs and legs, not headlines and opinions. Back home, I filled a small notebook with tasks that had nothing to do with her. Reorder chalk, ask maintenance about the third base lip, draft a 1-page grant summary the principal might actually read, email the foundation about our last application's feedback, clean out the hall closet, iron 2 shirts, schedule blood work. Doing becomes a kind of prayer when words complicate. She tried one more test midweek, a conversation about finances laced with contempt. Why do you still carry your half of that old student loan? She asked, like responsible wasn't respectable. I said I'd finish paying it in spring and didn't ask about the recent charges I'd flagged. When contempt didn't catch, she floated nostalgia. Remember Charleston? I said I do. It was good because we were good to each other. She stopped there, as if the memory itself could do labor present choices refused to do. The principal caught me in the hallway Thursday and asked about parent volunteers. I told her I had a plan brewing. She smiled, the kind of smile administrators reserve for projects that might reduce a headache later. In class, I drew a timeline of the Gilded Age and listened to teenagers discover how much of modern life was decided by people who dressed their greed in a moral vocabulary. After the bell, I updated my own timeline. One more week like this, then movement. The superiority leaking from her friends into our kitchen wasn't going to rot the studs of my house. I'd seen enough homes collapse from termites nobody named. When she finally said it outright, I think I need space to figure out who I am, I didn't flinch. I said, understood. Space has terms. No sarcasm. No sting. Just a statement of policy. She looked frustrated that I wouldn't throw furniture or beg like the podcast promised. I cleaned the counter, wrote practice plans, set my alarm. She sighed theatrically and went to scroll affirmations in another room. When someone asks for space, you can argue with the word or you can give it shape. I woke early on a Saturday, before the neighborhood dogs remembered to bark, made coffee, and pulled the flattened moving boxes from the hall closet. I didn't rage pack. I sorted. Blouses together, shoes paired, the vanity tray wrapped in dish towels so the glass wouldn't rattle. I labeled each box in my blocky coach handwriting, the same letters I use for a lineup card: bedroom, bathroom, desk. The ring of tape sounded louder in a quiet house. When I finished, I stacked everything neatly just outside the door, covered the top boxes with a clean tarp in case of weather, and set her tote on the doormat where she couldn't miss it. Space, delivered. Not a threat. A mirror. On the kitchen table, I left a single page. Not demands, not accusations, terms. We split essentials evenly and stopped pretending we're sharing what we aren't. No cross-charging groceries. No silent withdrawals from one account to make up for the other's weekends. If you want nights out, you carry your nights out. If you need more than space, we'll formalize it with a timeline and a mediator. Beneath it, I wrote the sentence I'd already said aloud. I will not argue this. I will honor it. Then I turned to my side of the ledger. I ended every auto-pay tied to my debit card that served both of us and moved utilities I still needed to my own login. No announcements, no speeches. A clean budget is a boundary you don't have to police. I took down the 2 framed photos that had kept pretending we were still in the same story. Our Charleston weekend on a windy pier and the wedding shot where we looked older than our years because we believed we were done searching, and slid them into the drawer with my ring. I left one picture up on the bookshelf. Me and the team from last season, red dirt on our pants, grins too big for a losing record. We'd scratched out pride in the small innings. I needed that face in the room. The rest of the day, I worked on things that grow. I printed a 1-page proposal for a mentorship program, pairing a handful of seniors with 3 men from the community who'd offered help before life got busy, and brought it to the principal with a calm ask: pilot it for 6 weeks. I'll run the logistics. She read it at her standing desk, nodded slowly, and said, start with 5 boys. I'll cover snacks. A green light doesn't fix a marriage. It makes the road you're actually on visible. I stopped texting first. Not with venom, just the removal of a habit that had been feeding the illusion we were still us. My phone went quiet in the evenings. I filled the quiet with what I said mattered: reading, planning practice, a beginner's guide to school leadership with more checklists than speeches. I set a reminder to register for the spring admin course our district subsidizes. The fee is small if you register early. I did. People think building a new frame for your life is dramatic. Mostly it's clicking submit on a form before you talk yourself out of it. She texted at noon. What is all this? I wrote back, the space you asked for. Your things are outside. If you want to talk, send a window. I'll be at the field from 2 to 5. I kept the period at the end, not a question mark. She replied with a single word, wow. The kind of syllable used when theatrics don't work, then nothing else. I left my phone on the counter and drove to the school. At the cages, one of my infielders asked if the rumors were true that we'd finally get lights this year. I told him the truth. I'd applied for a foundation grant months ago and hadn't heard back. On my way home, the foundation director called. Coach Brooks, we like the mentorship angle tied to athletics, she said. We can fund the lights if facilities signs off on installation. Send updated bids. I pulled into a church lot and sat with the engine off, listening to a sentence I could build with. Midpoint shifts don't announce themselves with fireworks. Sometimes they arrive as someone on a crackly line saying yes to work you did before anyone believed you'd need it. Back at the house, I took a deep breath and wrote 3 emails. One to the director with revised quotes, one to maintenance asking for the site review, and one to the 2 dads who'd said they might help with anything good for the boys. I told them what we were doing and when we'd need hands. Each message was short and precise. Men show up when you hand them a task that matters and a time to be there. I cooked a simple dinner, washed the pan, and put the dish in the rack. The urge to narrate the day to someone passed quickly, replaced by the steadier rhythm of not needing an audience. Around 9, a neighbor texted about the boxes by the door. Everything okay? I answered. She needed space. I gave it. He wrote back a thumbs up and nothing else. Good neighbors don't ask for allegiances. Before bed, I walked through the house to see what my choices had actually changed. The absence of her coats made the entryway look wider. The dining table, cleared of half-finished projects and candles that had turned decorative, looked like a place where people could plan. In the bathroom, there was only one toothbrush. It didn't look lonely. It looked factual. I turned off the lights and slept the sleep that follows a clean line drawn between what you can control and what you won't. Sunday morning, I set out cones in the yard and mapped a week of infield footwork on a legal pad. After lunch, I drafted a simple message to her parents. 2 sentences, no blame. Letting them know she'd taken space and that we were handling it respectfully. I sent nothing to her friends. The version of me circulating in other rooms didn't need cross-examination. It needed to run its course without my oxygen. By afternoon, maintenance had replied. They could inspect the poles Wednesday. The foundation confirmed receipt of the updated bids. One of the dads emailed back within 10 minutes. Say when. I wrote the when and hit send. In the late evening, she pulled up, headlights spilling across the boxes. I stayed at the kitchen counter, finished entering grades, and listened to the thud of cardboard sliding. The doorbell rang. I opened it to air and the faint perfume of a restaurant I could name. She stood on the mat, eyes bright with indignation and something else, fear, perhaps, that her script had been replaced. You really put my life outside, she said, not a question. You said you needed space. I answered, even, so I gave it form. I stepped aside so she could grab the tote. She looked past me into the house, scanning for an invitation that wasn't there. I wasn't a bouncer or a host. I was a man who had stopped pretending. She grabbed 2 boxes and walked them to her trunk. On her way back, she paused. This is cold, she said. It's clear, I said. Clarity feels cold if you're used to fog. For a second, I thought she might push harder, make a scene, or cry. She didn't. She carried the last box without another word. The door closed on its own weight. I locked it, not with drama, but with the same motion I use every night before I sleep. The house hummed again, refrigerator, water heater, a home doing its job. I washed my hands, turned off the kitchen light, and stood in the living room where our wedding photo had been. The empty space on the wall didn't ache. It waited. Tomorrow I'd follow up on the inspection, finalize the mentorship roster, and print a sign-up sheet for dads who wanted to run stations at practice. Not a reinvention. A continuation without interference. She had called me a phase she'd outgrow. My answer wasn't a speech or a pleading biography. It was a set of actions that made her sentence true on my side, too. Mirror her logic, and you don't have to argue. You just stop living like you're responsible for another adult's contradictions. The boys would see the light soon enough. I'd see them first, the arc of something steady, earned, and bright across a field that had been dark for too long. The boxes were gone by morning, and so was she. A neighbor mentioned seeing her load the trunk hard. Jaw set, the kind of anger that needs an audience. I didn't provide one. I brewed coffee, updated my to-do list, and sent the final diagram to maintenance for the pole layout. By lunch, the principal had approved the mentorship pilot. By 3, 2 dads confirmed Wednesday evening for installation prep. I kept my day on rails. The house stayed quiet in a way that didn't ask for explanation. By late afternoon, she texted, "You didn't have to humiliate me like that." I read it twice and put the phone face down. No one was there when I rolled tape across cardboard. No one watched me label what belonged to her and what didn't. An hour later, "We need to talk." I sent the same line I'd already written on paper. Send a window. "We'll talk here, businesslike." She replied with a photo of an apartment entryway I recognized from stories about a friend who gets me. New doormat. New key. Her caption, "I'm fine. Good. People should be." Monday at school, the boys ran footwork until they forgot to dramatize their mistakes. The mentorship sign-up filled before lunch. One kid who never volunteers wrote his name carefully, like he was practicing a signature he wanted to keep. In the afternoon, facilities walked the field with me and nodded at the placement chalk. "You did your homework," the foreman said. I told him that's the only kind we assign. His crew scheduled the dig for Thursday if the weather held. That night she called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened at the counter with the light off. Guilt came first. "You made me look like I was homeless," she said, voice tight. "Like I'm some child you had to discipline." I kept my breath even. She wasn't homeless. She had a key, a couch, a chorus. I had a calendar. The next message tried seduction, a laughing memory about Charleston and the way my hand fit the back of her neck when we walked crowded streets. I wiped the counter, rinsed the sponge, and let the memory do exactly as much work as it had earned in the present. None. Third message, blame. "All your routines killed us. You can coach a team, but not a marriage." Wednesday evening, 3 dads stood on the foul line with thermoses and work gloves. We marked anchor points, measured again, and sank sleeves as the sun bled out behind the pines. Men who don't talk much said enough. "Tell me where you want it. Hand me that level." Looks true. I sent a photo of the empty sleeves to the foundation director with a thank you for believing what we were building would matter to kids who needed someplace bright after dark. She wrote back, "We'll be there for the switch on." Around lunch, a screenshot arrived from her, an airline confirmation. 2 tickets for next month to Denver. Under it, "We're taking a trip." I put the phone back in my pocket and taught the populist movement to fourth period. People love a story where someone new promises everything. The test is what's still standing after the parade. After school, we ran a short scrimmage under sky the color of an eraser. The boys asked when the lights would go live. Soon, I said, and meant it. The weather held. By Thursday evening, the poles stood like for clean sentences at the corners of the outfield. When the electrician tested the system, one bank flared then cooled, as if remembering how to work. We clapped anyway. I sent a text to the dads. Saturday, 6:15, test run. Bring your boys. Their response is stacked. We'll be there. Wouldn't miss it. Proud of this. She arrived just after dark Friday, not knocking, just stepping into the porch light like a person arriving at a hotel lobby that should recognize her. I opened the door and stood aside. She looked around at the cleared spaces and the single place setting on the counter like she was trying to find leverage that no longer fit in the room. "He said I could stay here," she blurted, meaning the friend. Then he needed time to think. She laughed a small, angry sound. Apparently on the phase. I didn't gloat. I poured water from the sink and waited. She paced a tight square in the living room. "He says he's moving to Boulder. That he met someone who wants the same kind of life. He needs to see if it's real." Her eyes were glossy, not with tears, but with disbelief that the ground she'd tested me on was giving way under her. "He's going with another woman," she added, like saying it might make it less true. "I'm sorry," I said, and left the sentence alone. Sorry as an observation, not an invitation. She tried to reassemble the old pattern, reaching for crisis closeness. "We could," she started, then stopped when she realized there wasn't a pronoun big enough to cover all the missing nouns. "I misread you," she said instead. "You never fought for me." I met that line like a pitch I've seen 1,000 times. "I won't fight another adult for the right to respect them," I said, voice level. "You asked for space. I honored you." She looked at me the way people look at bridges they've already burned, as if heat might reverse itself with enough will. She slept at her friend's place that night, or maybe in a hotel. I didn't ask. Saturday morning, I chalked foul lines, set out bases, and wrote a new practice plan on the dugout whiteboard. Short hops, double cuts, situational hitting. At 6:12 the dads arrived, then the boys, then the foundation director with a volunteer photographer and a box of donuts. I counted the seconds under my breath and flipped the breaker. The boys hooped. One kid took off his cap and held it to his chest the way some folks do for an anthem. I let them stand in it for a minute without instructions. Half an hour later, she walked up the hill in a jacket I knew, stopped at the fence, and watched. From that distance, I could read the math she was doing. The field, the team, the dads, the principal clapping in the bleachers, the lights burning clean, an ecosystem that needed her respect more than her approval. She raised a hand timidly. I nodded once. She stayed where she was. After we wrapped, the director asked if she could say a few words. She thanked the volunteers and the school and added a line about how consistency creates safety. People clapped. I thought about how many nights I'd wanted to toss consistency for catharsis and hadn't. The boys ran bases one more time under full light. Dirt looked like velvet. We swept the dugout, locked the shed, and headed down the hill. At the fence, she waited. "I didn't know you had this in you," she said, not snide, just stunned. "It was always here," I answered. "You just didn't like what it required." She swallowed, then tried one last move. "What if we start over? Counseling. Honest rules. I'll come home." Her mouth tightened. "You're really not going to save me." "I kept my vows," I said. "You returned them." I handed her the dignity of her choices and took the dignity of mine. On Sunday, she texted 2 sentences. "He's gone. He left a note and a key." I didn't reply. Shortly after, her mother sent a message that was mostly a sigh spelled in words. In the afternoon, I sat alone in the bleachers under bright poles and listened to the field hum a new sound, electric and steady. A space can collapse when no one keeps its beams true. But a field doesn't care who applauds. It rewards whoever shows up on time with their glove open. She called me a phase she'd outgrow. Then she came back to see what I'd built without her, and realized building was never the point of her season. The cave-in wasn't dramatic. It was simple. She reached for a life she'd left, and it didn't reach back. The lights stayed on. The boys laughed in the infield. Morning after the switch on, I woke to a house that sounded like itself. Refrigerator hum, water heater tick, no footsteps preparing an audience. I brewed coffee and opened the laptop to a blank document titled Next. It wasn't dramatic. I listed what a clean ending required: a mediator, a fair division, a date. I sent a short message offering two paths: formalize the separation and divide with dignity, or attempt a rebuild anchored to non-negotiables: truth, counseling, and visible accountability. No speeches, just terms in writing so emotion couldn't smudge the ink. Her reply came at noon, more tentative than I'd seen in months. She wanted a meeting first. We sat with a mediator at a small office near campus. Gray carpet, box of tissues, a painting of a salt marsh meant to calm people who refused to calm themselves. She talked in circles at the start, trying to turn regret into a blanket large enough to warm the present. I kept the conversation on rails: assets, schedules, next steps. The mediator's pen clicked quietly. When it drifted toward nostalgia, I brought it back. Respect is the entry fee. Without it, there is no arena to play in. We divided the house in practical terms. I buy out her portion of the equity with a payment schedule we both can live with. She keeps her car and personal accounts. I keep the house, the pension I've actually earned, and the baseball program I've built in inches. Neither of us bleeds the other. The mediator said our session was the least dramatic she'd seen all month. She tried once more to negotiate the past into the new agreement, softening words, reducing choices to misunderstandings. I pointed at nouns: boxes by a door, a plane ticket to Denver, a text that called a husband a phase. She looked down, and for the first time, I saw the quiet cost of losing the version of me who would have argued for her. There are men who find satisfaction in that look. I didn't. Mercy is also a boundary. I will not hit you with the truth harder than you hit yourself. Life condensed into clean habits. I paid the buyout installment, scanned the receipt, and filed it. I met with the principal about turning the mentorship pilot into a standing program tied to attendance and grades. She gave me a green light and a small budget for transportation and sandwiches. On Thursdays, the boys met with the dads in the cafeteria. Men in work boots and polo shirts leaned over algebra worksheets and talked about deadlines at job sites and deadlines on essays like the same muscle group. I stood back and watched connections string across tables like quiet power lines. Word of the lights and the program reached people who hadn't seen me as anything but a schedule before. A mother who barely made eye contact at conferences asked if I could talk to her son about summer courses. The custodian started saving extra chalk because he'd watched us write goals on cardboard and didn't want us to run out of space. Respect came from odd angles: nods in the grocery store, a hand on my shoulder after a game we lost but didn't quit. None of it altered my steps. It just matched them. She sent a handful of messages over the next weeks that moved like weather fronts: warm, cold, warm again. He's really gone. I can't believe I fell for that. I never meant to hurt you. The last one was the quietest. I didn't know stability could look like this. Not to punish, to keep the lesson intact. People often want you to mend the net they cut. If you do, they learn that scissors are reversible. Final papers arrived on a Thursday. I read each page at the dining room table and signed where the flags told me to sign. There were no fireworks in my chest, no funeral dirge. Just a small exhale I'd been holding for months without noticing. I sent a scan to the mediator and a copy to her and closed the folder. In the drawer with my ring, I left a note for myself with a date and a sentence: you ended as cleanly as you knew how. I'm not sentimental about jewelry. The ring can stay where it is until it means only metal. That night we had a home game under new lights. The stands weren't full, but they felt fuller because faces stayed. The boys moved crisp in the infield. No panic on double cuts, no flinch on short hops. After the game, she stood near the gate, waiting the way people wait at airport baggage claim when they hope the carousel will cough up what they lost. I walked over. She asked if there was any version of us that survives a reset. The lights reflected in her eyes and made me think of the field the night before the bulbs were installed. Dark, wide, all potential and no structure. I told her truthfully that resets are for machines. People decide. If she wanted a life adjacent to mine, She'd have to build one that didn't require dismantling mine. She nodded, seeing it finally. I wasn't angry. I was done. Weeks slipped into a rhythm that didn't ask for permission. I cooked real dinners twice a week, ate on the porch when the air softened, and slept with the window cracked so the pines could remind me I live where seasons still perform their craft. On Sundays, I fixed things I used to ignore: loose hinge, chipped step, dripping hose bib, small acts that make a home less likely to betray you. I changed my emergency contact back to my own name first, then to my brother, because strength isn't isolation, it's choosing your team. I heard she moved to Charlotte for a new job with different friends who talk about different futures. The information arrived like junk mail, recognizable, irrelevant. I set it in the recycling bin. People deserve the dignity of their attempts, even if you're not invited to witness them. If there's a moral, it's boring. Respect is not negotiable. Not loud respect that performs itself in public, not transactional respect that pretends to be affection, but the kind that shows up as consistency when no one's clapping. I don't chase what calls me a phase. I don't pet what bites. I keep a calendar, a field, a program, and a life that matches my words. When the boys ask what changed, I tell them nothing worth changing about who we are. Only the parts that try to talk us out of it. The lights shut off on timers now, long after practice ends. I lock the shed, check the gate, and walk the baseline back to the car under a sky that has its own rules. She once said she'd outgrow me. Maybe she did. Maybe I did, too. Either way, I didn't shrink to fit. I didn't break to prove flexibility. I stayed the size of my commitments and discovered there's room inside that for everything I actually want. I don't try to win anymore. I build, and anything that can't stand next to that isn't meant to stay.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.